Oh my God, that's Welcome everyone to the City of Aspen City Council special meeting. It's June 16th, 2025. I'm sure I'm forgetting something here. Our mayor is unable to join us tonight, so I am called upon to run the meeting. I will take a call to order. Can we have a roll call vote?
Councillor Benedetti?
Yes.
Councillor Doyle?
Here.
Councillor Guth? Councillor Rose?
Here.
Mary Richards. Mayor Richards.
Okay. Our first subject is the new city manager recruitment process. Rachel shared this memo with me that we got from our acting city attorney, and this is what it says. On March 11th, 2025, during a regular city council meeting, city staff presented several options to the previous city council to search for city manager candidates. Those options included going through an RFP process to find a professional recruitment firm, or alternatively, to direct staff to perform the recruitment and selection of the next city manager through an internal process. The previous council directed staff to initiate an RFP process and to use a professional recruiting firm for the selection of the next city manager.
I don't think they can hear. You might have to put the mic a little closer, and maybe for grassroots too. Yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
What?
We're just having trouble hearing back there, and maybe on the TV too.
Oh, people can't hear you.
Both my mics are on.
There you go. Just closer. There you go.
Okay. Kind of intimidating.
It's going to be harder with that machine over there. It's going to be harder to hear with that machine going on over there.
Exactly. Okay, so city staff issued an RFP and have continued to work diligently through the process. Several months have gone by since the prior council opted to initiate the RFP process, and this council may want to reevaluate whether the use of a professional recruitment firm is the right direction for the city, or whether an internal process is more desirable, as there may be highly qualified internal candidates. This is now back on our agenda for discussion to determine if this council wishes to pivot from the prior council's direction and consider an internal process for the selection of the next city manager. If anybody has any input, this will be a great time to hear it. I do have a comment from Rachel to follow up with that statement. She said, "We have a very professional and talented, experienced staff. Doing an internal search first before proceeding with a headhunter seems the best option for us. Any search firm would deserve to know if there are any potential internal applicants as they go to interview and solicit others to apply." I think that's pretty straightforward, and I agree with it wholeheartedly.
I defer to Sam as a member on the search committee.
All right. Yeah, what we discussed was going to an internal candidate because we believe we potentially have one internally that would be perfect for this position, would understand some of the big projects we have going on, like the armory, the entrance, the lumberyard, and would help move the city of Aspen forward in the best possible light. So through those discussions, it seems to make sense to go through with an internal search.
I would agree with that, and would point out that
Mr. Ch-
too much.
If I may make a recommendation, at this point, excuse me, to go forward with an appointment, you do need to post internally, at least by state statute. Need to post the position open internally. I don't think there's a minimum amount of time, but I do know there's some question about how long you want to have that posting available, or that opening available for applications. So Alyssa may be able to provide some assistance. What I was explaining, Alyssa, was that it is required to post this internally, at least. The question is there a minimum or maximum amount of time you can leave the application period open? Because I have heard a suggestion that you would want to do it 30 to 60 days to allow the interim city manager to continue his work, and then just give a longer period of time to apply. But I think that's within your discretion, and what I would suggest is making a motion to direct staff to post it internally with applications due and provide us the time frame. That's my recommendation.
I guess I'll take a motion.
I'll make a motion to direct staff to post the position for a city manager internally for 30 days.
We talked about a number in executive session, and I think this is fine to talk about what we talked about in executive session, because now we're out of executive session, we're being in decision making, and if I recall correctly, I thought it was 45, but I feel kind of agnostic about the number. I just wanted to say what I sort of remember from that executive session.
Well, you're making the decision today, so you can put it as part of your motion as to whatever period of time you wish. Whether it was what was somebody suggested at executive session or something you want to do here is up to you.
Yeah, I'm happy with 30 days, so I'll second Christine's motion.
Was that your motion, 30 days?
And did that sound good to everyone as far as the motion that was made? I just want, yeah, okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
You can always extend it.
Okay.
Technically, you could extend it if you wanted to, but
Our
But-
standard is 5 business days for internal postings, occasionally 1 week to 2 weeks. 30 days is reasonable and fits within human resources practices too. So we're good.
Okay.
Can we reduce it if need to?
no, I wouldn't recommend that.
Okay, then it is what it is, so 30 days, I guess.
And that was seconded?
Yeah, I second.
Your motion, Sam, second.
Okay. Roll call vote.
Counselor Benedetti,
Yes.
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Rose.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously. All right, on to the board and commission appointments. So we did some internal polling to find out who's going to end up where, and it's pretty straightforward since we had mostly one applicant for one open position. There are some exceptions, but at any rate, do I need to read this as a resolution?
Well, what I would recommend is that you go through each board or commission, and that somebody make a motion to appoint whoever they wish to appoint to the position. I do have a list of applicants and positions that are open. I mean, I can go through them, or you can, or Pete can. But
I might be able to at least start the process without too much hand-holding. Should we start with the Aspen Picken County Animal Shelter Board? I'll take a motion to nominate.
I move to appoint Megan Ruby to the Aspen Picken Animal Shelter Board.
Seconded.
Okay.
So we're going to need a roll call vote.
Roll call
on
vote
each
for those,
one,
okay. Roll call vote for Megan Ruby, appointment to the Aspen Picken Animal Shelter Board.
Counselor Benedetti,
Yes.
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Rose.
Yes.
There are four boards that don't seem to have a lot of applicants, but have a number of openings. You could do them all at once if you chose. Particularly the Arcade Advisory Board has 2 regular openings and 2 applicants, Anthony Green and Dan Michaels. HPC has 1 regular and 2 alternate openings, but I believe Roger Moyer is the only applicant that you're considering at this point, and he's been a regular member. Open Space has 1 alternate opening, and Ann Mullins is an applicant. The Board of Adjustment does have 4 regular and 1 alternate opening. 2 regular members have reapplied, Andrew Sandler and Ashley Fedderson. You may want to consider all of those in one motion, and then you then there's some others that are a little more contentious.
Not all the boards at the same time, but
You do all, what I recommend is doing one motion with what I just read out, if
Okay.
that's okay with you.
I think we were hoping to make an adjustment for one candidate who applied to 2 boards and put her on the Board of Adjustment as well.
Exactly.
Yep.
I also was going to ask Tony Green, I thought he withdrew, is what I was going to say.
Oh, Anthony Green withdrew from the ARC Advisory Board?
I thought so.
I'm not aware of that, but I can't say definitively.
Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't sure if he had a note from Rachel. I just don't remember. I don't think he interviewed. I know Ashley still won for Board of Adjustment.
Yeah.
So,
I can try for a motion.
You want to try?
Yeah, I got the names. I'll make a motion to approve Dan Michaels for the ARC Advisory Board, along with Tony Green, so long as he actually applied and wanted to be on it. Andrew Sandler, Ashley Fedderson, and Linda Manning for the Board of Adjustment. Roger Moyer for HPC. Amos Underwood for the Local Licensing Authority. Ann Mullins for Open Space. And then that leaves P&Z, so that's my entire motion for now.
I'll second.
Okay, hopefully that makes
Okay, roll call vote for those boards mentioned.
Counselor Benedetti?
Yes.
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Rose?
Yes.
Okay, so we have the Planning and Zoning Commission left. 4 applicants: Linda Manning, Dwana Juskus, Max Twarjan, and Richard Lai.
now you already appointed Linda Manning to the Board of Adjustment, so you
Exactly.
can't be on 2.
So take Linda off, and that leaves 1 regular and 2 alternate, and what do you know?
Yeah.
Got 3 people.
They all were wonderful. When I was on the phone with Mayor Richards, we talked about Richard Lai being the regular member and Max and Deanna being the alternates, but it's no slight to them. I think they're all wonderful. It's just Richard had the highest breadth of experience among those 3 to me, but if anyone feels differently, that's totally fine. Otherwise, I can make that motion.
I support that.
I'll support that too.
So you need a motion.
Did have some concerns about Richard saying he spends part of his time in Los Alamos, but he did say if he was appointed, he would be here. So, roll call vote for Planning and Zoning.
Was there actually a motion?
No, I'll make a motion for Richard Lai to be the regular member on P&Z, and then Deanna Juskis and Max Twarjan to be the alternates.
I'll second.
Perfect. Okay, roll call vote for Planning and Zoning.
Counselor Benedetti?
Yes.
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Rose?
Yes.
All right, that is our agenda for tonight. I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Roll call vote for adjournment.
Counselor Benedetti?
Yes.
Counselor Doyle?
Yes.
Counselor Rose?
Yes.
We cannot convene the work session until 4 o'clock, which is when it was noticed for, so we can all sit here and stare at each other.
Wow. Well, that wasn't an unpleasant test run.
You might want to
City Council work session of June 16th, 2025. We have a fairly light agenda tonight, but we're going to be starting with the APSHA Moving Assistance and Incentivized Right Sizing program. Hi, ladies.
Hi. Let me just share my screen quick.
Liz Axberg and Diane Foster, and Liz will be running the show tonight, and I will be doing color commentary.
Is it possible to turn up the volume in here because of this, or no?
Or we can talk louder.
I can try to talk loud, but I mean, I feel like if I get as close as I can,
I don't want you to
could
have
double
sore
up.
throats from screaming.
Yeah, I know it's a little hard to hear with the. Okay.
Know the answer to that? If the volume can be adjusted or not?
We have not had success turning that up. We're trying to keep the room as cool as we could at the same time since the building's.
We can project.
I'll try.
Thank you.
Okay. So, as Diane already introduced, so Liz Axberg, Housing Policy Analyst in the City Manager's Office. And we have a few housing topics today, so, and we did take one off as well since Mayor Richards couldn't be here. So today we're going to be talking about first the APSHA Moving Assistance and Incentivized Right Sizing, and then we'll move into a follow-up on the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition Good Deeds Program. So we'll start off with the APSHA Moving Assistance and Incentivized Right Sizing. And so this conversation is just to explore some programs and options to address spare bedrooms in the APSHA inventory, something that we've talked about for several years and tried right sizing, and the program hasn't had a lot of uptake. And so today I'm just going to give an overview of what that program has looked like, some alternatives, and then even this moving assistance program, which, while it's not right sizing, still something that addresses and has some of the same goals as well. And tonight, the overarching goal really is to just throw out some ideas, give you some background, and then get some direction from council on where you want to go with this conversation next, whether it's getting more information from staff or perhaps making a recommendation to the APSHA board. So, kind of as I already just said, so tonight really we're updating you on right sizing. Here's some possible alternatives, maybe get some ideas from you on things that I didn't bring up as well, and then throwing this moving assistance program that we haven't talked about before out there as well. And then ultimately, if there is a program that City Council would like to suggest to the APSHA board representatives here could bring that up at one of the next APSHA board meetings, since ultimately, like right sizing, it is a program administered by APSHA, but it could, but it's always helpful to get support from council, or if council has ideas they want to bring to the APSHA board, that's always a possibility, and ultimately be financially supported by the city as well. So first, I'm just going to give an overview of what right sizing has looked like. So the first time the pilot program was launched was back in 2023, when APSHA allowed for 5 swaps through a pilot program, and it had to go into the APSHA regulations as well. In addition to this, 5 units at Burlingame 3 were held for right sizing as well, where owners could basically get super priority in one of those 5 units. And so one of those units was, through right sizing, was taken up at Burlingame 3, and then one other one was taken up through the normal pilot program, which just looked like 2 owners buying each other's homes, and the upsizer and the downsizer. And then we have a third one underway as well, and that followed a change in the regulations that allowed the downsizing household to be at any category. Previously, the upsizing household and the downsizing household can only move one category since they requalified for this program, but so this did allow for this new household to also uptake it. So that's 3 in total, and it's just been difficult to have high uptake in this program for a variety of reasons, really. People tend to be specific about where they want to live. Like, they're willing to right size, downsize if it's this specific unit, like this nicer one, or this amount of bedrooms. And also, it's hard for people to want to give up the home that they've been in for however many years as well. Sometimes there's financial reasons behind it. They have an APSHA home that's completely paid off. They're like, why would I buy this potentially more expensive home as well. So there's a variety of reasons why there hasn't been high uptake in the right sizing program. And that being said, there are households who probably are still interested as well, even though there's those who are more specific about what they want. But so that's why today we're going to talk about a few potential alternatives to incentivize it. And I'm just throwing out a few high-level ideas to see which you think would be successful, and also what other ideas you have. And then that way we can either come back with more information or make a recommendation to the APSHA board. So here's 3 ideas. Yeah.
I wanted to add something really quick that goes along with what you were saying about the reluctance of downsizing. Several examples of this happened to me recently when I was campaigning for my most recent election. There are, as we know, a lot of retirees in our program, and what I learned is they're reluctant to downsize because when the grandkids want to come and visit, they want to have the spare bedrooms, and that's entirely, I think that's a reasonable thing for people to want to have. So that really struck me, and it explains a lot to me that why none of our retirees have really attempted to downsize. So go on, sorry.
No, definitely. And before the right sizing pilot program was implemented in 2023, there was a survey out to APSHA owners about their interest in right sizing. We found like most owners were willing to give up 1 bedroom. Like if they're in a 3-bedroom, they're willing to move to a 2, or 4 willing to go to a 3. And so there's a lot of specific wants and needs of owners. So yeah, and so here's 3 different ideas I'll talk through, and then after the slide we'll talk about the moving assistance program. But it'd be great to get any input or ideas. So the first one is maybe in future city developed affordable housing could reserve a certain number of units for right sizing, and so households are looking to get a smaller unit could get a priority. Potentially also could do this for rental units in the inventory. Maybe if households are aging and would like to move into a rental so that they don't have the associated responsibilities with ownership, that could be an option. Second is just cash. We could offer financial incentive to those who are downsizing as well, maybe. And then similar but different is to cover moving expenses for the downsizing household. How else can we step in and take some of the negative externalities involved with downsizing?
One notion to remember, though, is, right, when you think about outcomes with this, the outcome will be that bedrooms that weren't occupied will be occupied. Now, it's quite likely that they're not going to be occupied by a worker, right? Most APSHA owners are single-family units. APSHA does sometimes get some applicants who are from different households, and so you've got 2 or 3 people working, but that's not the norm. So just keep that in mind, that yes, you're creating more space, but you're not necessarily creating more space for more people who are working in the community. Thank you.
And another point I'll add to that as well is that we have high demand in all of our APSHA housing as well for both 1-bedroom houses and rental units as well. So we are still going to be impacting the supply of those units as a product of this type of program as well. So next I'll just go into the moving assistance program, and at the end we can take all the feedback on everything and always go back to slides too. So similar goals, but a different program that hasn't been talked about much before is a moving assistance program. So the idea here is assisting owners who wish to sell their APSHA home and leave the inventory, but maybe are unsure if they can afford it, or helping with that push. And so some recommended program components, and as I said, so it would look like owner would like to sell their home, we cover their moving expenses, and the deal is they permanently leave the APSHA program, versus right sizing is internal movement, and this one would be completely leaving the program. We'd make sure it's framed 100% optional. It's really not intended to push owners out, but helping those who are wishing to move. And there are folks in this situation as well. Back in the winter, APSHA did a series of focus groups with retirees, but we are saying this program's open to anyone who wishes to move as well, dependent on your feedback. But there was a few owners there who expressed that interest in maybe moving somewhere warmer, moving somewhere where their kids moved and left Aspen, but the situation they're in their APSHA home makes them unsure whether or not that's possible, given different financial reasons as well. And so maybe a moving assistance could help bridge that burden. And another recommended program component, based on your feedback too, of course, is there could be means testing involved too, and this program could be aimed more at owners who financially need this program to move as well. So whether there's income or asset requirements or different category households that are eligible, those types of things could be explored later. But at least we can get your feedback on the big picture of talking about this program as well. And so our questions for council on this program would just be, is this something that council would like to further explore and discuss? Or if there's certain program criteria that council would like to recommend if we were to do this type of program. And then, so this could look like we could come back in another work session and dive into more detail, or if this is something you'd like to recommend already to the APSHA board to start talking about as well.
And again, in that category of what would be the outcome of such a program, it will not create new units. It will simply shorten the period of time. Everyone at some point is going to move out of the APSHA property that they own, and it will come back to APSHA and to the community. So this is basically what you're buying is time, and you're also supporting people who genuinely can't afford to move, is the recommendation. Thank you.
So why don't I just jump to the big picture questions? And of course, we're still interested in those specific questions about moving assistance, but it really does tie together in that what questions does council have about what we talked about today, or possibly other ideas that have come up? What would you like more information on, or to further discuss at a future work session? Or what recommendations do you have that we could bring to the APSHA board as well?
Okay, let's open up the discussion. I guess I'll start. I think we should still be pursuing this somehow. I think it's worth pursuit. Not a lot has happened yet, but sometimes that's how programs start out. I think helping people that can't afford to move is also really important, and I appreciate Diane pointing out that it doesn't really create any new units. It just is an interim process. But it does have some benefits. Anyone else?
I am supportive of moving both of these forward, either bringing them to the board or council. I think we could decide that. In terms of right sizing, I have heard, right now it's on the owners to find their match with each other. I've heard some feedback on making that easier because you don't know what's out there until you know what's out there. And so maybe some sort of, I remember when I moved here, to find a rental or home, there was just a tack board in the APSHA house, APSHA office, and there you'd look to see what people had written on a piece of paper. That's a little dated at this point, but maybe digitally or physically, people can post swaps to try to open up or broaden the market for these, since right now it's only the people that are within your circle. And in terms of moving assistance, again, I support this, recognizing that it's not solving the problem, but I think there is a group of people out there that genuinely can't afford to move out of their homes and would like to, and if we can help them in some way, I'm in favor of looking at solutions for that.
Thank you. I just want to stress that this is both of these programs would be voluntary. And I think that's very important to say over and over and over again, especially as it gets echoed through the community and just talked about. Once again, going back to what we're trying to solve here, I think maximum utilization of our housing program is obviously the biggest deal, and that is twofold. One is that we have the workers, especially that live locally in our community, so trying to maximize our workforce. But then the other side is trying to maximize our community. So one side that I really attach to, especially as this goes to the APSHA board, is right sizing so that families can live here. One of the things that's personal to me and also just to this community as far as like how you have longevity is that if you have a growing family, that I think that is like just next level as far as how difficult it is to live here, especially if you don't have the space for it. So to Christine's point on like the how of like, you know, knowing what's available, but I would just hope that we could help growing families, but also just maximize bedrooms. And that's why I think at least right sizing as a concept is wonderful, especially as we talk about it in these early stages to hopefully build something without those unintended consequences. One other food for thought, as far as I don't know if it would necessarily work or if the deed restrictions allow for this, but sometimes I do wonder if you're already in like an APSHA ownership unit and you're especially looking as like a growing family or something along those lines, whether you can have a certain level of priority within the program, because it will still open up your unit as someone leaves, that sort of thing. So it's sort of like Lincoln Logs. As far as the program goes, to allow someone to go from a 2 to a 3 or a 1 to a 3, and then their unit opens up, but they get like more priority towards those 3+ bedrooms because they're already in APSHA ownership. Something along those lines is just a little food for thought. As far as the moving assistance, I do think this one, as discussed, has a lot more unintended consequences potentially, but I still think it's very much worthy of an APSHA board discussion. I think this one is more workforce driven, but honestly it could help the growing family as well and the community as a whole. It's just a matter of is the money that you're spending going to go towards what you're hoping to accomplish, or is it just going to be wasted and you just help someone move away from this community? So that, and like I said, that one especially needs to be emphasized as voluntary so nobody feels like they're being pushed out. It's just a help to anyone who wishes to have that help because they'd like to leave for whatever reason that they choose. But ultimately, just to answer the questions as a work session, yeah, I would like to see these move forward to the APSHA board to discuss all the wonderful benefits and unintended consequences, plug the holes, and try to accomplish the main goals we're looking for. And like I said, when it goes to the APSHA board, I think the priority number one is just answering the question, what are you trying to accomplish? Which for me, at least initially, is maximizing utilization of our bedrooms, maximizing our workforce, allowing for movement for growing families, and just people to be in the best position possible with their housing, and seeing from that what you can do.
Fully concur with everything Sam said. A couple additional things in terms of the financial move, the moving incentive, financial incentive. Moving assistance, financial incentive. I think this should be structured as a one-time program, not an ongoing benefit. I think we should throw a lot of firepower at it in a short time window, see what the uptake is, see how it works. I don't like the precedent of it being a continuous ongoing program. I think that opens up a lot of challenges over the long term. I also, as I'm listening to the comments of other counselors, I'm wondering whether we should consider a concept where we change the deed restriction to require right sizing after you're at certain events in life. For example, if you raise a couple of children in your home and your children move out and no longer live in Aspen and aren't working here, like, does it really make sense for you to continue to own a 3-bedroom in perpetuity? Should that be part of our deed restriction, that, there's certain triggers that sort of require you to participate actively in a right-sizing program? I'm open to that. certainly interested in exploring that. I know that we couldn't apply that retroactively to deed restrictions, but we could certainly do it for deed restrictions moving forward. I'm supportive of all three of the different sort of ideas that you presented, and would like to see if we can get traction with them. Thank you.
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, well, it sounds like, though, and just to make sure I'm on the right page for where we're going next, so it sounds like, though, we want to move this to the APSHA board to continue to flesh this out?
That makes the most sense to me.
Okay, and we can let them know that you're all supportive of it. Yeah, and then, I mean, I just want to check also on some of the ideas of the right sizing. Is this something you just want to throw at the APSHA board and see what they think makes the most sense?
I'm personally supportive of all three of those concepts, so I think you should flesh those ideas out a little bit more and present them to APSHA personally. That would be the approach that I'd recommend.
Yeah, I agreed on that.
I like all three ideas as well, and I think the APSHA board are the people who should flesh this out.
And then we'll also include Christine's, I called it right-sizing marketplace idea, and also Sam's, can't read my own notes, capacity priority during turnover.
Yeah.
So people who meet capacity having, right now you have to meet capacity, but there are situations where if there's no one who applies, it goes to below capacity. So we could look at some kind of priority.
Make sure we pass along all the feedback received today.
Yeah, and also, Diane, if you would run my updated deed restriction concept by them.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Let's see, we also had that would be a one-time program as a recommendation, requiring a deed restriction that would be after a life event as well. So we'll share all those and then likely come back to you with a funding request.
Perfect.
Lucky us.
Great.
Thank you. Thanks, Liz. Thanks, Diane.
Okay. So, about one more. All right, continuing on.
And you're back.
So this is a follow-up on the funding ask that City Council received from the West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition for their Good Deeds program. So I'll give a quick refresher on that May 12th conversation that was had and the ask from West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition. And then we have a few options for council to decide how to proceed with that funding ask. So just as a reminder, I know April gave a robust presentation back in May, so it's a regional buy-down deed restriction purchase program that assists anyone who works in the Roaring Fork Valley. And so West Mountain pays 30% of the purchase price of the home, and in exchange they put a permanent price-capped deed restriction on that home. And so far 9 homes have been acquired, and it's been costing around $80,000 a bedroom on average. And 4 of the buyers who have benefited from this program so far work in Aspen as well. And so far I put all the different 2025 contributions that have been received so far. And as you can see, Glenwood also did a funding commitment for 5 years along with their contribution. So some of the jurisdictions are also considering that. And so here's just a few options. And again, that ask from West Mountain was $1 million. And I know City Council's been juggling a lot of different funding asks right now that you're considering. So first, if you want more information before being able to make a decision, we could have another work session and bring April from West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition back in to answer questions. Second, if we're not ready to make a number decision yet today, we could bring this as an action item at a regular meeting and bring a resolution with a blank figure for that. And thirdly, if council feels ready to make a decision on the dollar amount today, we could just bring a resolution to you at one of the future meetings. So,
Okay.
happy to answer any questions also.
Bill.
Thanks. What's their demand look like today? Is there a queue for, do they need more funding to fulfill the demand? Are they sort of just hoping to have more requests and have the funding in place when they do get those requests? I'd be interested in understanding where that stands.
Yeah, that's a good question, and I don't have the actual number but they have regular meetings. If you want to participate in the program, you have to attend a virtual meeting to learn about it, and they gauge how serious you are. And I know last time I talked to April, she said she has at least a few buyers lined up from those, and yeah, but I don't have like an actual number on the queue, but this is something we could definitely bring back as
Yeah,
well.
love some statistics on like, okay, we got that there's 9, I think that was the number, right? 9 that have been done so far,
Yeah.
like what's happening now?
And it was oversubscribed last year, right? The program ended about 6 months early because it ran out of money. And there is no question that even if City of Aspen were to give $1 million, this will underfund it because, right, year one, and all the people who bought were in that space of they're not able to, they're not qualifying for other programs, right? We didn't have a lot of people who were like, oh, I live in Apsha now and I want to move down Valley, right? This is hitting that missing middle.
All right, any other questions, discussion?
Yeah, I think I'm supportive of some form of funding for them. I do want to recognize that all our housing money requests are not done in a vacuum, and we obviously have a big expense with the lumberyard coming on. So I don't know if it's 2 or 3 with that discussion to be had so that we can talk about the dollar amount, what makes sense for us with everything else we have, because I think when we talked about the mobile home park, you had that list of other monetary requests, and I think it's smart for us to have a robust discussion about triage and priorities to make sure that we're not throwing money at things without realizing what we should be budgeted for. But otherwise, I'd be supportive of this. So whatever that means for the options, I just want to make sure we're doing this from a holistic point of view. If that's 2 or 3, or whether we need a work session for it, I don't know, but hopefully you do.
And Sam, just to provide, what I hear you asking for is not only that list, but the question essentially is, can we afford it? And how do we afford it? Right? So to see the dollar figures associated with those and what Pete and team have been thinking about for funding structures on those.
Yeah, and I mean, like, one other request, I guess it's on the agenda tonight, I don't know if they're coming back, the modular factory, I don't know how much they're asking for, and I don't know if we're going to, yeah, so you know, but like, I don't know how much we're going to give, and we can't just say yes to everyone always if doing it from a budget perspective. So I just want to make sure we're doing it that way. And then when it comes to West Mountain, I do like the year-by-year basis, because I do think this is one of those tools that we're still in a pilot phase of, and so far it's been mostly good, but I don't always guarantee that it will be for the city of Aspen because it is so broad. But even so, like this year, I'd be happy to give some dollar amount to personally. It just depends on everything else we have going on.
I agree with everything Sam said. I think we need a little bit more context before we decide or confirm the amount. But in general, I like this program and in favor of supporting it, just undecided at the amount.
Any comments, Bill?
I made mine already.
Okay. I think this is really important work, getting deed restrictions wherever we can get them. I would be happy to, if it was up to me, give you the amount you're asking for, or giving West Mountain Regional Housing Coalition the amount they're asking for. But with Rachel not here and with all the other programs that have been pointed out, I think it would be a good idea to go with option number 3. I'm sorry, option number 2.
Okay,
So we
great.
decide that in a regular meeting.
All right, we can bring that as an action item and pull together, answer the question you had, Bill, and some other information as well, including that list of competing priorities, so you can have that holistic look going into the decision as well.
Great.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I get Drew back in?
Okay.
I just shared my screen on Zoom.
Yeah, but then it's.
Oh, is it not?
Yeah, I didn't
I
want to.
just let them know I had to.
All right. Next on our agenda is the Armory Hall Adaptive Reuse Status Update.
I feel like it takes so long after you hit.
Don't have to take a sauna today.
Want us to turn that back on?
Okay.
As you wish. If they have questions, I'm happy to answer them. So.
Sorry, I'm just opening up. Sorry, I should have had this open. Yeah, I will. Is he here? Is he on? It's just taking a minute to load, sorry.
No problem.
Didn't open.
Oh my God.
I didn't like that. What's going on? Yeah, okay. And then I need to zoom. Yeah. Well, I had opened it. Yeah, I need to share. Yeah, I need to pull that up. It's the work session, yeah. You go to full screen, but you have to go like out. How do you get to your full screen? I did the click on that. It's not showing you're good. Okay. All right, sorry about that.
No problem.
Should have opened that up earlier. Good afternoon. My name's Jen Phelan. I'm in the Asset Department and am the project manager for this project, the Armory Hall Adaptive Reuse. I also have project team members here at the dais with me. Bo Breck of Ripple Creek Properties. He's an operations expert for us. Todd Kennedy of CCY Architecture, the lead architect on the project. In the audience, we have Simon Elliott from CCY, and also we have, what is going on now?
Could you just move the mic closer?
Move the mic closer? Okay. All right. And Jessica Garrow of Design Workshop. In the audience online, we have Garrett Simon of Immersed, who's also here to talk about operations. So today we want to focus on the project in 3 topics. We'd like to talk about the interior design progress. We'd also like to talk about operations related to issuing an RFP. And then we want to talk about the building exterior and discuss the design direction in recent HPC hearing. We'd like to discuss these as 3 individual topics and wrap each topic up at the end of the discussion of the topic so that we aren't going back at the end of the presentation to individual topics. So just to remind council, we've had about 10 years of discussing the Armory. First, in 2015 and 2018, there were ballot initiatives that discussed the future of the Armory. In 2022, we started the heavy public engagement. And since 2022, we've had about 1,000 responses to the public engagement, either in person or in surveys. We've had 3 distinct engagement efforts. We've had council had numerous work sessions with them, and there have been 5 resolutions that have been passed associated with this project, whether it's emphasizing prioritization of the programming on the interior, whether it's been exterior programming, such as Connor Park improvements in the parklet, in addition to the building, and facade development. We've also, in some of these resolutions, talked about the anticipated timing of review for this project and when council would like to see construction occur. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Todd to start talking about the first topic, interior programming.
Hello, everyone. Great to be back. Hello, everyone. Great to be back in front of you to talk about this very exciting project. We've made a lot of progress since we last met. I think we'll keep this initial review of programming at a pretty high level and move pretty quickly, as we've got a lot to get through tonight. So with that, we want to just go through an overview of how the plans have evolved to get to where we are today. So Jen, we can go to the next slide. Is a really high-level overview. You'll remember on the main level of the Armory Hall, we've proposed a total of 3 distinct kitchens. And with that, in the past, we've shown an area for some retail sales, as well as what we've referred to in the past as a bar. We'll revisit the bar a little bit more, but generally the plan has really just adjusted in subtle ways here. The stair has been reconfigured. Now, instead of a split Y stair that we had before, we have a single run of stair, and that was really just about maximizing open floor space for maximizing seating and generating revenue through those seats. We can go to the next slide, Jen. In terms of the bar, we've begun to look at this as a bit of a different concept and really calling it the lunch counter. We've heard concerns that maybe the first floor with a bar that so solidly anchored the space that the first floor of Armory Hall would be seen too much as a drinking establishment rather than a place for families to gather. And so the subtlety between a bar and a lunch counter is probably very, very subtle. But I think the difference is that it's the idea that that eating takes priority, that the design of the bar is much more like a diner. The example images that we've got pulled up here are from a very successful establishment in Telluride called Butcher and the Baker. It certainly provides coffee service, it does provide alcohol service, but generally this is not seen as a drinking establishment. So through exploring the interior design in creative ways, refocusing the bar element here to be thought of as an eating destination and a lunch counter rather than a focal point for alcoholic service. We can go to the next slide. At this point, we're approaching the completion of our 100% DD phase of work for the exterior core and shell, and we're nearing completion of the 100% schematic design effort for the interior design scope of work. So we've begun to develop renderings in more detail for each of the spaces that we're going to look at today. This is the main level, and you can see to the left the lunch counter, which displays prepared foods, whether that be baked goods, croissants, deli salads, whatever it might be. So again, this is a place about interacting, getting your lunch, taking it somewhere to sit down. You can see the staircase up to the mezzanine, and then we also have some precedent images on the right that begin to speak about the character we're beginning to imagine for the space. We can go up to the mezzanine. So this is the mezzanine level. This has been slightly reconfigured. We've actually switched what we've called in the past the community boardroom, now calling that the library with the billiards tables. We made that move so that the community boardroom or the library has a little more capacity to it so that nonprofits or small private birthday parties have a little more space and can see a little more capacity within that room. As we go to the rendering of this space, you can see here, particularly in the central portion of the mezzanine, that we've opened up to the second floor and to the three large skylights. So the mezzanine, for the majority of it, still has a very large open feel. And again, some precedent imagery to the right. The community library is intended to be a space that can open or close off depending on the needs for that space. So again, a private meeting can occur in there and not be disturbed by the energy and ambient noise of the whole Armory Hall. As we go upstairs, we still have two kitchens, we have some restrooms, and of course the stair down. Here we do have a bar that is more focused on alcoholic service, sort of dresses up to sort of be what you might expect of an establishment that was about going and having some drinks with your friends, but also provides a great deal of soft seating. Later, we'll revisit this to talk about how this space in particular has some flexibility to serve various events of different sizes. And here's the rendering of that space looking towards the bar. The bar's still very early in its design, but again, gives you a sense of how those skylights impact this space and the openness, exposing the brick wall, and of course, then the openness to the mezzanine and the main level below. As we go down to the lower level, this hasn't changed. The plan has evolved in minor ways as we work with our operation consultants to really dial in the back of house. But the community hall space itself is about the same, remains unchanged. And we envision this really as a flexible space for meetings for some type of winter or holiday market, as well as small banquets of up to about 80 to 90 people. This is a rendering of how that space is developing. This space is quite limited in terms of its ceiling height, so we've embraced a design concept here that's really about embracing the coziness of this space and sort of enveloping the space with this sort of warm textural wood finish, as you can see in the precedent images on the right. So this is the slide I was speaking to. We created this exhibit. In our past discussions, there's been some questions about how the Armory can serve events for the community of different sizes. So we've really created this graphic. We've designed both the mezzanine level as well as the second floor to think about how there's points of control, or what we've generically called, in quotes, velvet ropes, that allow a local club like the Aspen Cycling Club or a local nonprofit to use certain footprints within each of these spaces to cater to events of various sizes. These events would be, in addition to normal everyday operations of the food hall, the location of the kitchens on the second level are very intentionally justified to the east, so that if there is a private event happening either on the smallest version of the upper level or the largest version of the upper level, the public that's using the facility downstairs still has general access to each of those kitchens, and these upper-level kitchens aren't seeing a loss in their revenue due to a private event being held. In terms of what we need from council, we really want to focus on the evolution that's occurred to date and just get some sense that this is headed in the right direction from an interior programming standpoint. We welcome your discussion and questions. Bill.
Happy to jump in. Thanks, Todd. I like the direction this is going in generally, and I'm open to this de-emphasis of the bar on the main floor if the operations team feels like there's an economic model that will lead to the success of the building. So that, you know, we don't need to get into great detail on that. I imagine you wouldn't have presented this option if you didn't think that there was some way around that, but I'm okay with that, and I think it could be good. One thought, I recall visiting a place called Pine Street Market in Portland, Oregon, years ago, and they had a few seats at each stall vendor location where they did full service dining, like, you know, basically the cook is handing you the food and the drinks directly. But each vendor sort of had their own small bar where they had like beverage offerings that were congruent to their food concept. So the ramen guy had some Japanese beers and Japanese whiskeys and whatever. And that might be something interesting to explore, given that we're de-emphasizing sort of the main central bar. Maybe we give some of that back in a limited capacity to the individual vendors. I think that could add to the success of the vendors and add to sort of the overall vibe and kind of offerings. Bo, go ahead if you have
Yeah, right on. Thanks, Bill.
You seem anxious to jump in.
Yeah. So to really address your question, the way the lunch counter has been reconfigured, or the way the bar has been reconfigured into the lunch counter, we view as, we believe, will be revenue neutral to the model that we've generated. So it's really just a de-emphasis of alcohol on the main level and form, and to expand upon how it might operate. And we want to have flexibility here for the ultimate operator licensee, and we'll get into this a little bit later on. But you know, this will be somewhere where perhaps they're not mixing cocktails or shaking cocktails. The operator or licensee may choose to have pre-batch cocktails down here, and again, in that de-emphasis. But we believe it's revenue neutral to what we've shown you guys before. And then, you know, interesting idea about, you know, individual food vendors serving beverages that complement their offerings. At Edgewater Public Market, that's actually the way we develop the property, not with alcohol. So I think there'd be some things to talk about in the liquor licensing and who manages that, who sells that. But, you know, very interesting concept that, you know, at this time, I think, you know, we're still working out exactly what the point of sale system and all the counter space that exists for those vendors. But we made room for it at Edgewater, and we have very comparable kitchen setup.
Great. I really don't like this second floor conference room. What do you call it, the library or something like that? I just think there's so much idle time on spaces like this. I appreciate that it can be opened up and can become, but you know, you're gonna need a conference table in there if it's going to facilitate meetings, and I just think it'll be highly underutilized space compared to sort of the vibrancy that it could offer if it was part of the programming of the primary use here. We have so many community meeting rooms already in this community that are available. I don't think that's the highest and best use here. I'm not a fan of that dedication of the space to that. Otherwise, I like the staircase change. I think it's architecturally interesting. I don't think I don't think the split Y is missed. I think it's all moving in a great direction programmatically. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions?
This has come a long way.
Christine, you're off.
Turned it off, great. This has come a long way and evolved really nicely. This is my first time at the council table, being able to weigh in on the armory. The game, you didn't talk too much about the game room side of this. Was that a previous discussion at council tables? Okay.
Generally, that's integrated to the mezzanine right now. It consists of 2 billiard tables and a shuffleboard table.
Great. I like that idea. And I'm in favor of de-emphasizing as well the bar area. One of the things I think we're missing in this community right now is a casual place for coffee and meetings, and this could satisfy that. So I'm in favor of moving some of that to the third level, the prioritized alcohol service. Bill, I do tend to agree with you on the community room. I think that when I saw these renderings that second level could be activated a little bit better. My first thought was this level will be underutilized because of how it's set up right now. So I would support looking at tweaking that a little bit.
More games.
Yeah, more games. That's all. Thanks.
Yeah, to Christine's point about what we're trying to solve, affordable food and beverage relative and the community gathering space. I guess I will echo their comments of the mezzanine being that I don't think that room necessarily doesn't have a purpose, but I don't know, maybe it can be more opened up and you have something slides out that makes it not warded off like it is in the renderings. I like the idea of the programming here. I think it's good to have a master lease operator involved as soon as possible. I saw that is when we have the entitlements, but I do think the tweaks that I would make are the ones that come with a master lease operator to prove that this will be successful. I think it will have a different vibe at different times of day, but I do like the de-emphasis of the bar portion, even though I think that probably needs to be a part of this. And I don't know, just because your renderings are just renderings, I was just thinking it could be more colorful inside. But otherwise, it looks very nice and very welcoming, and I think it has great potential it has from day one, and I really look forward to getting that master lease operator involved and really moving this forward with some good speed behind it.
I got to say, I think the renderings are fantastic. Not sure if that's exactly how the building is going to turn out, but it's obvious to see that we're going to end up with something really incredible here. So I'm excited to see this through to completion. I guess should we go through the questions? Or are we ready for that?
Questions for?
The only question was on interior programming
Now we're
so
moving to
far.
operating.
I think, again, the renderings look great. I like the fact that you've de-emphasized the bar. I don't really have an issue with the community room or the library, whatever we're calling it, but I understand where fellow council members' concerns are coming through. Since we're not voting on anything tonight, I like the progress that I'm seeing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to turn it over to Bo to spend a little bit of time talking about, Bo and Garrett to talk about the operational side.
Hello, everyone. Good to be here tonight. Good to see many of you again and some new faces as well. So as we've talked about in the past, we're planning to deliver Armory Hall in a turnkey condition. And what we've contemplated is what we've called a master operator, or you can also think as a licensee model. And so for any of you who maybe don't specifically recall or need a refresher, or if it sounds brand new, we're going to give you some of that refresher here shortly. But that's the way we're setting this up. So just like we're programming the asset to meet market demand, it's really important that we set up operations to maximize the marketability to a licensee and really create the most probability of driving successful outcome for this asset. So with that, there's a number of things, really 4 topics we wish to talk to you about. One of them is flexibility of lease terms, and we might want to just think about flexibility as a general theme here for some of what we're talking about. But specifically around lease terms, the city's typical lease term for city-owned assets is 5 years with a 5-year renewal option. And our team, me specifically, and Garrett on the line as well, have some serious concerns about the ability to attract the quality of operator or licensee to this property based off such a short lease term. And so in order to incentivize the outcomes that we're wishing to achieve, it's something that we're going to be talking about a little bit more, but as is, we want to identify that that's a challenge. We've also talked a lot about affordability at the Armory, and this is one of our primary goals. The way we've programmed and designed the building has been to drive affordability by nature and by design. But there's also been discussion about what sort of parameters or restrictions would the city possibly want to put on an operator in terms of dictating any affordability that may exist at the project. And while our recommendation at this time is that restrictions can be challenging, perhaps we want to just talk about that more and talk about how we can hopefully incentivize the licensee and operator to achieve the goals we're looking for. The third one here is a big one. It's Connor Park and the Parklet. There is an incredible opportunity here to capitalize on the synergies that exist between Connor Park and what we're designing at the Armory, and to really elevate the experience at both those properties to make it something that is cohesive and connective while still being distinct. I mean, ultimately, it's all for the public. So we want to chat with you more about some practical operational items as it relates to Connor Park as well. And then this fourth bullet point says permitting process, but I think we can really think about this more as pre-development process in general. And so we want to chat with you about how we foresee going through the process and issuing this RFP, selecting an operator and negotiating, and the best way to do that to maximize the probability of success as we work through pre-development. Thanks, Jen. All right, so here is the refresher on the master operator model. So bear with me here. We're going to start at the top with the city of Aspen, who is the owner of this asset. This is a public asset. I think this is always intended to be a public asset. Aspen will always be the owner. Work down with me to the master operator licensee. This is an agreement, as again, a master lease agreement, essentially, for the manager or an operator who is going to run food and beverage at the facility and also take care of all property management. So the agreement will be directly between the city and whoever selected as the licensee. And again, that licensee will be the beneficiary, operator and beneficiary of the revenue generated from the food and beverage and the lunch counter. And then they will also sublease then, work with me counterclockwise now from the bar and lunch counter. They will then sublease to the individual kitchen and food vendors and the retail vendor as well. So our revenue sources are food and beverage revenue, as well as rental revenue coming off from the retail and the kitchens. And the agreement, as we've contemplated, as what that looks like with the city, is there'll be some baseline rent for the licensee operator, and then also a share of revenue would be the best way to try to incentivize all parties and align interests. So we were down at the kitchens working our way just around counterclockwise again. Event revenue is one of those revenue streams as well. So, it's important to think that this master operator, they're really doing all the day-to-day nuts and bolts management, maintenance at the property, including everything it takes to run events there and schedule those and collect from folks, et cetera. And same thing with ACRA. So ACRA, we've contemplated as, we'll have an agreement directly with the city. This is now a permanent home for ACRA. So that could be a lease agreement or an access agreement, but ultimately the licensee master operator will oversee their facility, will bill them back for their appropriate share of some CAM charges that can't whether that be some utilities that might not be metered individually or other items. So again, this master operator is the one who makes this thing run smoothly, and based off that partnership with the city, then creates an economic benefit for both parties. Next slide here. All right, so this is speaking about process section, and where we're at in the process is land use and entitlements. And our team has really been viewing that as a condition precedent to issuing the RFP. And really, the reason being is it's very important that when we go to market the RFP, that we're able to market it sincerely as this is a project that's moving forward, that's going to happen, and that has some sort of timeline that can be relied upon. That'll be very important for getting folks' attention. That'll be very important for getting their buy-in, and very important for getting people to put their best foot forward as they propose partnering with the city on this asset. So certainly we view land use approval as a condition precedent to us working on the RFP and ultimately issuing it. But our team's recommendation on the specific time we issue the RFP is really going to be dependent on the timeline of when we anticipate we break ground. So we'll be talking about that a little bit more in regards to the pre-development process on the next slide. But in the meantime, you can hold for now. I think as you think about us moving through this process, we'll issue an RFP. We'll be inviting back proposals and hopefully inviting back ideas and a chance to learn a few things in that process and collaborate. We'll be looking to select the best partner, and then the critical part is the negotiating of the agreement. We want to drive towards selecting the best partner, having some open-endedness to really negotiate an agreement with them that, again, incentivizes parties and aligns interests. So it's really about maximizing marketability. It's really about trying to figure out how to cast the widest net to attract local and regional talent to respond to this. And we really, again, want to identify then through that process the most attractive proposal so we can negotiate to achieve the city's goals. So this speaks a little more specifically to the timing. What you see on the top of the screen represents what is considered an expedited permit review timeline and how that lands on a construction start date. So based off of a 12-month permit review timeline, we would recommend, and if we could achieve land use approval based on this schedule as well, we think issuing the RFP at the end of this year, very beginning of next year, is really our target best case scenario timing that we can recommend in good faith in terms of getting the interest that we'd like to get. As you can see, as you move down to the second schedule, which represents a more traditional timeline of permitting a permit process here in the city of Aspen, we recommend actually pushing out issuance of the RFP all the way to the fall of 26. And again, the reason being is it's really about how close that issue date is to our anticipated construction start and groundbreaking date, and how we think that affects the marketability and will affect the market perception. So we just want to call this to council's attention that, yes, we recommend issuing the operator RFP after land use approval, but that is also with the contingency on gaining better clarity on the total timeline to permit the project, and asking for hopefully some flexibility of when we issue that RFP based off of the timeline that's determined. Next one. All right, so we've talked about a lot of these things. We're kind of going to recap and perhaps expand a little bit here. So again, I think what we're doing is we're really setting this asset up to meet the market and maximize desirability. But it's important to remember that no one can control market forces, right? So when we issue the RFP, we're going to see the market speak, and hopefully we're going to hear some really good ideas. But with that, our team encourages maximizing open-endedness and flexibility, speaking clearly on what we need, speaking clearly on what we're looking for in a partner, but in terms of actual nuts and bolts economic partnership structure and some other items, we recommend flexibility in order to achieve the desired outcomes here. So with that, we respectfully request that council start thinking about typical lease term at this asset and solutions, whether that's through an extended lease term, extended renewals, or other incentives that can help address that issue as we've identified it. It's very important to us that council knows that affordability is top of our mind. And again, we are driving towards affordability by design. And at the point of time of issuing the RFP, we don't recommend having any affordability restrictions mandated in the RFP, but we do think it's possible that affordability restrictions might be negotiated for once the right operator is selected. We've talked about some of these concepts in the past at some like-kind properties, elsewhere in the market. Sometimes landlords or operators will require that the kitchen or food vendors carry a certain number of menu items under a certain dollar price point. That would again be something that we recommend negotiating privately with the operator once selected after going through the RFP process. Because I think we're likely to hear some interesting ideas on folks come back based off their experience as well. So, and then I'm probably going a little long here, but Connor Park again is we think a incredible opportunity to really capitalize upon and again elevate the experience for both assets. From an operational standpoint, it's very important that patrons, customers of Armory Hall not only feel invited to go out towards Connor Park, but also have the ability to do that freely with food and beverage that they purchase inside Armory Hall. So perhaps some of the operational maintenance purview, busing of trash and things like that will have to fall under the operator. And from a practical standpoint, I think the city will want to be thinking about liquor licensed premise or the line of where you can take an alcoholic beverage and where you can't take an alcoholic beverage. And then last, and we've really talked about it already, and gave the recommendation, which is based off of what we anticipate in the pre-development process or what clarity we can get from council on the pre-development process will ultimately determine the timing of when we recommend putting out the RFP for a licensee. I glossed over it, but the last thing I say is again, Connor Park is an incredible opportunity, I think, to complement the most successful assets of this kind. Have the sort of interaction and outdoor space to work with as we're contemplating here with Connor Park.
Bill?
I'm ready for comments unless Jen had some.
No, if I don't get something, I'll ask for it.
Okay. I'll go one by one. Flexible lease terms, totally understand the concern there. Whether we want to structure this as a long base term or as a series of tenant options, I'm open to either one. I think what's key here is that we make sure that there are performance standards that have teeth where we can terminate a lease or non-renew a lease. That's critical, especially in light of some recent circumstances that we have some, if things aren't working, we have the ability to pivot and select a new operator. Affordability restrictions, I am not a fan of the type of affordability restrictions that you described at all, Bo. What I do think is important here is sort of setting up some parameters that are part of the lease, part of the agreement, and I encourage you to set those out as part of the RFP. And those could include things like limited to no full-service dining. Maybe that scenario that I described earlier where there's 3 or 4 chairs at a given stall, but this is not meant to be full-service dining, and I think that in itself creates a naturally affordable food service experience or more affordable food service experience. Likewise, I think we need some structure around private events. So, limiting the number of full private events to either none or some limited amount. And you know, if we're doing partial events where part of the space is closed off, then we need to have parameters around how much of the space is still open and available to the general public. So this is just sort of throwing it out there to illustrate my point, but maybe at least 3 of the kitchens need to be available to the general public at any given time, something like that. You know, likewise, I think there needs to be expectations that the facility is open and functioning and available to the public X number of weeks per year. You know, you cannot close this for 6 weeks in the spring and 6 weeks in the fall. That is not, no one should go into this expecting that that's part of the deal. So I would encourage those sorts of major parameters to be part of the RFP to set the expectations from the beginning. Connor Park and Parklet, super supportive of utilization of it in the right way. So do I want to see, you know, servers out there in serving a black tie event? Absolutely not. But do I want to see people enjoying their food and beverage that they've obtained from inside, you know, whether that's brought out by runners or not? Totally open to that. I think that there could be some kind of negotiated agreement with the Parks Department over maintenance, sort of general cleanup. I don't think that's insurmountable at all. I definitely want to see this as an activated, sort of integrated, highly utilized part of this facility. Permitting, very supportive of an expedited process. Want to see this thing move forward as quickly as we possibly can. Thanks.
Excuse me, Bill. I just wanted to clarify one thing on
Sure.
events, just to help everybody understand a little more how we envision food hall events happening here. Regardless of event size, number one, we don't see a full buyout of the entire building. But in terms of those sort of event flexibility diagrams that I showed, anytime any one of those events spaces are cordoned off, we see all 5 kitchens being available to the general public. And generally the way events work in food halls is people will get a card of some kind and they go to whatever kitchen they want, they purchase their thing, bring back to their reserved seating space. So just in terms of addressing that concern and understanding how we envision events working here, just wanted to add that clarity to the discussion.
Great. I think that's a great format for events. There may be other formats for event that help drive revenue too, and maybe it's, you know, half of the upstairs gets sort of sectioned off and there's a certain number of times per year where that's allowed. You know, we wouldn't want that on an everyday basis, of course. So, but I encourage you to put some thought into this now and make it part of the operator RFP process now, so that we're setting those expectations from the beginning, so that it's not a difficult part of the negotiation process when we get to that point with the selected operator. You know, there needs to be a community benefit to this facility, and we got to balance that with sort of the economics of making it a successful enterprise. But I think the earlier we communicate our expectations and our parameters, the more successful we'll all be.
Christine?
Yes, I have a few questions. Who reviews RFPs?
Typically, we have a group of city staff who reviews RFPs, interviews, vets, and then makes a recommendation to council, and council's the final decision maker.
Okay, so it's all internal?
Yes,
Okay.
typically.
And then in terms of the expedited process, we gain time. What's sacrificed in an expedited permit process, if anything?
Well, I don't know what's sacrificed. It's how do you get prioritized in the queue?
Got it.
We've started having some conversations with ComDev of how to go about trying to meet council's expectations. You know, we still have to have more conversations, but one of the items that was brought up is most likely we'll have to do a phased permit so that we can get started as they continue to review other parts of the project.
Okay, thank you. I'll move down the list then too. With the flexible lease, I support that. I think based on what the market deems appropriate and what you find from operators. In terms of affordability restrictions, in in theory, it's a good idea. I have not seen it be successful in any city-owned property right now where we've tried to limit that. So I would not be in favor of it. And thus, I agree with Bill that I think that the setup here will naturally dictate that. I would suggest restrictions on affordability for event rentals, if possible, keeping that space as a community, for the community, and not making that more exclusive by rents. Connor Park, again, I think that looks good. This is a real opportunity, and I would even suggest, in my experience, some of these food halls that have outdoor components, family-friendly activations that can be part of that outdoor space, just bring some vitality to it, and that's what we're looking for at this council table, I think, to continuing support our families in this community. And I would also support the expedited permitting process, I think, primarily because it brings in the operator earlier, and we need to, I'm in support of doing that. I think that the operator needs to be part of these planning discussions.
I echo a lot of Bill and Christine's comments. I think doing this right will set it up for success with the right parameters. So flexible lease terms, very open to that, especially if it gets us the right master lease operator. Affordability restrictions, a lot of what Bill and Christine said about how it would be set up to be affordable. And, you know, a lot of times if we're talking about like private events and limiting on those, but if a certain number are allowed and that's a big profit maker for whatever master lease operator, that can make everything else more affordable. That's where like my mind goes as far as allowing that, especially to certain limits. Connor Park should be activated in the parklet, so I think that's really wonderful, and I would really expect that as far as things go. And then expedited permitting process for me. I think this was needed yesterday, so getting this done will be very exciting and important for this community.
Thanks. I'll run through these quickly. I support flexible lease terms. I think some points made up here at the table are valid, although I do think we have some great brains in the room that can figure out some affordability restrictions. It's hit and miss. The Connor Park and Parklet, I think those are two assets that would benefit from each other. As far as alcohol being consumed outside, I have some qualms about that, but I think we can address that moving forward. And yes, expedited permitting process, absolutely. I think the sooner we can get this up and running, the better. Okay.
With that, we're going to jump to our next topic, which is really the building exterior, both architecture and landscape architecture. In regards to the exterior architecture, the ultimate goal is for a successful adaptive reuse of the historic Armory Hall, transforming the building into a community gathering space anchored by a food hall. In order for this goal to be met, the Armory will need a building operator that sees the potential in the project for economic viability. An equally important goal for the city, given the investment that will be required in the project. But more importantly, we are looking to create a thriving, energetic place that can be a place for locals and visitors to gather and connect. While we're here, we want to thank the Historic Preservation staff as well as HPC for all their time getting the project to where we are today. As you likely have heard, the land use application received a denial with conditions from HPC. The specific conditions are listed here. As we discuss the project in more detail and these conditions, we're happy to refer back to this slide and discuss the conditions in detail. A summary of the conditions and the concerns which they address are listed here. As we discussed the last time we met, we are trying to find the balance between the design guidelines and creating a community gathering place that has the highest likelihood of success. We believe the proposed design conforms with the vast majority of the guidelines relevant to the project. Historic Preservation staff and HPC see this differently. Moving forward, we will share the current design and the guidelines we feel support the proposed modifications and additions to the building. It is important to note, in the introduction of the Historic Preservation Design Guidelines, it is stated, it must be emphasized that these are only guidelines and they are not applicable in all cases and need to be weighed with the practicality of the measure. Regardless of the outcome of our recent HPC hearing, we'd like Council to understand that throughout the process, the design team has been weighing the desires of the community expressed in many engagement opportunities, guidance from food hall development and operational experts, and direction from HPC guidelines. HPC guidelines and Council. The guidelines have included both historic preservation and commercial standards. The project's team's intent is to design the armory in a way that finds a balance between all of these, sometimes competing points of view. Get to that later. In this slide, we show a bit of an evolution from initial concept to where we were at the land use submittal. Throughout the process, we've worked with historic preservation staff to iterate and evolve the design to where it was when we submitted for our land use application. This has been the case with HPC as well. As we present, we'll share some of the modifications that were made from our first HPC hearing to our second. In regards to exterior material palettes, you see a digital material board here which shares those materials from obviously the brick of the historic armory. The wall cladding we're proposing to use at the Visitor Center and Vestibule Addition is a weathered copper. We've proposed a synthetic cedar shingle roof, steel window systems, restoring the painted shingles on the dormers, and restoring the sandstone cladding and wall base that you see scattered around the armory. One important thing to note is brick is obviously the most predominant. The proposed changes affect about 4% of the armory's brick. As it relates to the roof, with historic preservation staff and HPC, there was a lot of discussion on appropriate materials. We had originally shown a copper roof. HPC had expressed some concerns about the new roof on the armory matching the wall cladding on the additions, creating a sense that maybe there was some blurring of the lines of what was new. From that, we pivoted to the use of a synthetic cedar shingle. At the time of the building's completion in 1892, there were wood shingles on the building. Of course, with wildfire danger and working with the fire department, actual wood shingles are no longer an option. We specified the synthetic shingles in the hopes that that would be a reasonable compromise. I think generally the take from the HPC meeting was that either using a standing seam painted metal roof or asphalt shingles were the preferred approach. We'd like your feedback later in our discussion around the use of synthetic shingles. It's been approved for other projects through HPC. The design team felt that the standing seam painted metal roof, in contrast with the copper cladding on the vertical walls of our additions, would look cheap and inexpensive for such an important building for the community. So we'd either propose the synthetic shingles or replacing the asphalt shingle roof that's there today. The western facade of the building is the building's primary facade in the eyes of the commercial design standards, as it is addressed on Galena. Architecturally, we think this is the case as well. The symmetry, the increased level of brick detailing in the front door suggests this. On this face, we are proposing no changes, simply a restoration of what is there, other than the removal of the Hopkins roof extension and the addition of the new visitor centers on the building's north side. The addition was placed on the north, as this is where additions have been found throughout the armory's history. In the HPC process, a commissioner suggested adding glass to the east side of the visitor center, shown here. As you look through the building, you can see the glass on the far side of the building. This was to increase the transparency of the visitor center and more clearly express the existing brick of the armory's north face. HPC's conditions do not take issue with this design as proposed. As we move over to the Connor Park side of the building, we are proposing a small addition for a vestibule, a new accessible secondary entrance off Hopkins Avenue in Connor Park. The new Hopkins entrance is set back 17 feet from the Hopkins building face, clearly making it secondary to the primary historic entry centered on the building's Galena facade. The proposed vestibule addition creates a secondary entrance on Hopkins as required by the commercial design standards. The commercial design standards requires that commercial entrances be oriented to the street and requires a second entrance on corner lots on the secondary street. Standard 2.1 requires that a height of 12 to 14 feet for the first level is maintained. The entry vestibule and the visitor center addition are, the interior finished ceiling height is at 12'6". This addition, like the visitor center, on a rear building face, are set back from the street face so that the armory remains the predominant structure as viewed from the street. The mass and roof forms are simple and do not compete with the historic resource, but are compatible in scale. Additionally, they are clearly a product of their own time. This speaks to the design's compatibility with all applicable guidelines of Chapter 10 of the Historic Preservation Guidelines. The team feels strongly that an intentional and visible ADA access is an important and critical part of meeting the building code and providing equal access to all members of our community. Guideline 12.1 of the HP guidelines also requires this. Similar to the visitor center, we expanded the glass at the north wall of the vestibule addition for the same reasons we just articulated when discussing the visitor center. So the brick of the historic armory is apparent as you look through this new element and can see that the vast majority of the armory is intact. This slide shows part of our historic window survey. The results of this show that the 3 windows this addition are impacting are not historic openings, but were added in the 1990s. The 3 windows we're impacting are the first level and existing second level windows all the way to the south. So 1, 2, 3, 2 on the existing second floor, 1 on the existing main level. In considering the feedback from our first HPC meeting to our second, we made the following changes. We redesigned the canopy edge to be simpler per discussion with HP staff as well as HPC. We reduced the footprint of the vestibule canopy. We reduced the size of the window on the Connor Park elevation, and we changed the window detailing to address staff concerns. The images of this slide share some of the history of the building with a primary focus on Hopkins. The structural bays along Hopkins, particularly bays 1, 2, and 5, have been changed and modified to accommodate new use throughout the building's life. The upper right image shows the building pre-1906 without the Hopkins eave extension. The next image shows that a similar eave extension existed on the north after 1906 to preserve the building's symmetry on the Galena facade. The north extension was later removed, creating an imbalance in the building's originally intended symmetry. We feel the Hopkins elevation is key to the project's success. We believe these proposed changes will work together to help create a successful project, create a vibe that draws the local community as well as visitors and tourists alike. These changes will allow for the creation of the Hopkins Parklet, increase the, my notes got jumbled. Let's move on to the eave overhang specifically. Sorry about that. Although there are guidelines suggesting that this eave has its own historical significance, the design team believes that there are other guidelines which support the removal of the eave and conflict with this guideline. The current eave extension covers and obscures original character-defining brickwork, meaning the removal of this extension complies with guideline 2.1 and 2.6. We are turning the roof to its original form and preserving the original eave depths, suggesting this change complies with guideline 7.1 and 7.2. Additionally, guideline 10.1 says that HPC generally relies on the 1904 Sanborn maps, of which portions of a building, in terms of identifying which portions of a building are historically significant and must be preserved. The roof extension was added in 1906 outside of the building's period of significance. Will you go back one?
Sure.
In terms of modifications to bays 2 and 5, The Hopkins Avenue elevation has been modified many times over the life of the Armory, and as the use of the Armory has changed. The design team worked with staff to find the balance between the guidelines and the requests of council. Previous designs had impacted all bays, then bays 3, 4, and 5. After meeting and discussing with staff, the design was altered to modify just bays 2 and 5, both of which have been modified over time. Returning to our window survey, this slide illustrates that the openings we are impacting in bays 2 and 5 have been changed over time. In fact, 2 is a replication of historic opening but does not include a historic window in that opening. It also shows that Bay 5's existing conditions today are not historic, and the proposed modifications are not impacting the historic fabric of the building. In considering the feedback from our first HPC meeting to our second, we made the following changes. Redesigned the canopy edge to be simpler. Canopy widths were reduced to not extend across the historically significant brick pilasters on the Hopkins elevations, and we changed the window detailing to address staff concerns. Between our first and second HPC meetings, we also looked at an alternate design that removed canopies on Hopkins, but preserved the removal of the roof extension. The design team does not think this is successful because solar gain is uncontrolled, access through Hopkins is greatly limited without the canopies protecting those openings, and the proposed modifications lack a distinction between what is historic and what is new. From here, we're moving on to the landscape design of Connor Park. Predominantly what's at issue here is the use of a synthetic turf in the area where the label Connor Park occurs. Both Design Workshop and the City of Aspen Parks Department have proposed synthetic turf because of concerns over the soil makeup due to the large spruce tree, as well as the large amount of shade that tree creates for this zone of what would intended to be planted sod. We can go to the next slide. Is an alternative to the artificial turf, which HPC does not support. We looked at the possible use of gravel, which is not ADA accessible, as well as decomposed granite, or what is sometimes called crusher fines. We see the artificial turf here on the left and the crusher fines on the right, and we're concerned that the use of crusher fines creates a more urban condition that's not conducive to using Connor Park to the full extent that we would hope Armory Hall would be able to use it if we went with the artificial turf. With that, we look forward to an in-depth discussion with City Council and are excited to continue to develop the project. I think it's important to say that we're excited to continue to develop this project, whether we're asked to conform with all of HPC's guidelines or whether we move this design forward. The proposed design, as we've presented here today, is really thinking about the economic success as well as the vibe success of this project in the future for the community. Our desire is simply to shepherd the project to a successful outcome for the community. The question is, what does success look like? Thank you for your time.
Thanks. All right, comments or questions?
Happy to go first or wait, whatever you want.
Go first.
Thank you. Great presentation, Todd. Firstly, thanks to the whole team and HPC and everyone who's invested so much time and effort and thought into this. We're going to have a great project as a result of the collaboration. So thanks to all. I really think that my place here is on one topic, and that's the roof extension, because that's sort of the most meaningful thing in my eyes. And I'm willing to compromise on pretty much everything else. But I do tend to agree with the applicant team on removing the roof extension. I know that's contrary to HPC's opinion, and I respect that opinion tremendously. But in my experience restoring a lot of Victorians, I've never once heard of retaining a addition to a building because it had obtained its own historical significance. That's the first time I'd ever heard of that concept. Every project I've ever done has been bringing it back to the original constructed condition as much as possible. The notion that awning has gained its own sort of notoriety and significance, it just doesn't jive with me that much. So I think my biggest feedback here is I'm okay with removing that historic awning roof, or non-historic awning roof. I'm sorry, non-original might be the best term. I understand that's contrary to HPC's opinion, which I value very much, and I'm sorry to go against it. Everything else I'm willing to sort of collaborate on. That one I feel strongly that the applicant is correct on, and that it's critical to the success of the project to open up that facade and really create an engaging pedestrian experience. Thanks.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll ask the question of just to reiterate and remind myself of this list, you and your project team, what matters most to you as I read this packet? I know what Bill described, you say it's your preference sort of thing, and what I'm looking for here is to follow HPC as much as possible while not tanking the project, having some level of compromise. I mean, there are certain HPC guidelines that are like tough to work with sometimes, but for good reason. But I just want to make sure we're moving forward with what is just the most pragmatic approach to this, because I care less about the exterior as much as I care about the functionality of the interior. And I really just want to know from these exterior points that you're talking about, what's going to negatively affect the interior, and that's more or less going to be the answer to my question of what, how to proceed on each one of these, if that's easy enough to answer.
That's a complex question, and with a probably more complex answer than you'd like.
Yeah.
And Bo, I might let you jump in here too, as necessary to answer this. I'll take my pass at it. I think really how I would answer that is, it is anything that drives a connectivity between the exterior and the interior of the building. So there's sort of a gradient of those things. For instance, the roof extension on Hopkins, we think, is a very important part, maybe the most important one. With the roof extension left in place, we think the quality of space, the quality of outdoor space that exists on the Hopkins Avenue right-of-way, we've debated as the city team and the design team whether it's worth the investment in creating the Hopkins parklet. The right-of-way as it exists in our designed parklet is about, I think it's 18 feet from face of building to the new curb line, and the drip line for that roof comes down almost dead in the middle of it. So anytime that it rains, you've got water running off that roof edge and creating a condition that makes that parklet inaccessible. In the wintertime, that becomes a much bigger life safety issue in terms of roof avalanches and snow falling onto newly installed landscape or hardscape elements. Quickly behind that, I think, is the Hopkins Avenue canopies. And that is really about creating as much seasonal access through those revised openings in bays 2 and 5 as possible. In that design alternative, we looked at modifying the landscape design so that we could remove those canopies and then allow that seasonal access on a more limited basis through bays 2 and 5. And then I think lastly, the vestibule we feel is important in terms of really creating a project that is about equity for the community and working to create a vestibule that feels, one, that it responds to the scale and mass of the armory itself, but also to the context of the historic commercial core, and feels like an entrance to a very important facility and project for the community. So the vestibule at the current height conforms with commercial design standards, and we think creates an entrance for the whole community, whereas the primary entrance on Galena creates only an entrance for those that are able to use that entrance.
Thank you for that. I'll ask about the turf too, because in the images, it sounded that you made Connor Park look very sun-baked, and especially without like the greenery, it seemed like it was just going to be hot and unbearable to sit out there.
In those renderings, we're playing with the sun, so we've got the sun showing. If everything was in shadow, it would just be dark and hard to read the surfaces. So we've got it positioned at a time when there is a fair amount of sun. Mike, I'm not sure if you want to add anything on the concerns regarding real grass versus the synthetic turf.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. Mike Tunte, Parks and Open Space. I'm landscape architect and construction manager. I think one of the key things for Connor Park is it's right in our downtown core, as we all know, and yet it remains one of our least utilized parks. It's really only during special events where you get a glimpse of what it could be. Like if you go out there during our farmers market, you get a sense of how exciting that park could be. The conceptual design that you're looking at was developed in-house by the Parks Department because we feel strongly about it. It was then continued to be developed by the consultant team, and they've taken it in a wonderful direction. Turf is one of the concerns that came up during HP review. Even with the low use numbers that we see today, the turf struggles to live. It's in perpetual shade from the tree. You do get a little bit of morning sun, and then as the shadows move, it's a very challenging environment for turf. With the anticipated uptick in use, turf is going to equal mud and dirt. We vetted different opportunities or different materials. We landed on a synthetic turf for a couple of important reasons. One of those reasons is the flexibility of use. So we see what that means in terms of the park user experience. You can have chairs out there that you move around. You can put a blanket down on the ground and sit down. Kids can run around and play on this synthetic turf. It just provides a lot of flexibility. It additionally reduces our water use. I think relative in terms of the first characteristics of just the functionality of it, in my mind, that's a lesser concern, but it is a concern that we try to think about in all of our projects. And another important piece is it's Connor Park. And if we switch to a paved material, whether it's pavers, crusher fines, decorative gravel, it will start to take on a more urban plaza look and less of a public park look. So while we remain open to suggestions, I really do think for this park, for this use, a synthetic turf will serve this community well.
Sam, I might just add in terms of finishing a response to your question about what is most critical. Along with the canopies come the openings that we're creating in that Bay 2 and 5, as well as the new opening on the southeast corner to Connor Park. Again, everything that really affects the ability for the public, the locals, to move in and out of this building in a really organic way.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'd missed that one.
No, you're good. I appreciate that answer. It's tough because I don't like going against HPC and I value their work a ton. And I do feel like this is one of those ones where it's going to have to be compromised. So I think my answer to you, at least at this time, is to move forward with the things that this team thinks is most important while compromising as best you can with HPC on everything else. Whether that be the roof extensions, what you described, it sounds not so easily tenable to be able to not have those, like you said, with the drip line, and how inviting the canopies and the vestibule connection matter to the success of this project. But if there are things you can do with HPC's recommendations to have this and that, that's what I prefer. But once again, I want to follow HPC's recommendations and make this project successful, and they seem contrary at certain times, but if it's really that important to the success of the project, I think there's going to be a few that are going to break HPC suggestions, but ultimately break as little of those as you possibly can.
Thanks. And yeah, thanks to HPC. I know that a lot of time and thoughtfulness went into this along with staff and planners, and agreed. I think that there needs to be some compromise on some of these. With a few exceptions, I'd support the synthetic shingles, restoring it to an original form with a modern approach, basically. I'd say yes to the canopies. I was curious about if they could be temporary or retractable or some kind of compromise there. I know you probably have an answer for that, but just an idea. And I don't like the idea of turf. I think it cheapens a really elevated project. It reminds me of a bar in Denver or something. And so I suggest pavers or rocks or something else there, but I don't really like the turf idea. And I agree with HPC on that.
Okay. Let's see. I had a couple questions. What's the lifetime of an asphalt roof?
Depends on the roof. It can vary from 15 to 25 years.
That's better than I expected. Do you have a number for standing seam metal roof?
50 plus.
Significant difference. I understand the reasoning behind the shingle roofs, but I just have an aversion towards plastic. Another question is, when was the northern eave added? Was it added at the same time as the southern eave? And
I believe 1906.
And how many years was it on the building before it was removed?
I'm going to check in with Simon Elliott from CCY. The northern eave.
The northern side additions that were added over time, there were multiple additions that went on that northern side. Fundamental addition, I go with the Viking.
Sure, thanks.
It was either the 70s or 90s.
Yeah, so there were various additions obviously added on multiple times onto the northern side. It expanded, but all of those were pulled off in the 1970s.
Okay, thanks for that. What was that last thing? So I agree with Bill on this issue of the Hopkins Avenue eave. I understand it has significant historical value. I also understand the research that you have done, which shows that there was a northern eave that was added on after the building was constructed and then removed. So that figures into my thought process. I just think it should. I think the building will be a much more attractive and much more useful building without that eave. It's going to allow better views from the interior of the building and allow more sunlight in from the southern exposure. And I think that's super important to have an inviting place for the community to spend time. Could you put up the slide that had all the different questions? Sorry.
It's okay. Lots of slides.
Let's see, the Hopkins Avenue canopies, I really appreciate the thought that went into that and the fact that you've made them smaller. Understand the reasoning behind them to keep people out of the rain and snow when they're coming in and out of the doorway. So the window openings, not a huge deal to me. I think between staff and HPC we'll come up with a logical solution to that. And the turf, I agree with what Mike said about how hard it is to grow grass there and how that turns into mud when there's a lot of people there. So I would rather see something other than turf though, but I am understanding where Mike's coming from. Other than that, I really like the direction that this project has taken. I appreciate all the thought and emotion that HPC has put into this, and I, like everybody here at the table, I hope we can realize that this is going to take some compromise, and we're going to have to come up with, figure out what those compromises are going to be. So Again, I like the direction this is going. I think that's as much as we can say tonight.
I'm sorry?
I'm sorry?
Did you ask me a question?
No,
Because
no.
I do have a comment eventually.
Oh, please.
Do you have any more presentation? Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I do have some comments, and I want to emphasize a couple of things. This is a work session based on the fact that the city council is the owner of the property and is entitled and responsible for providing the applicant, the representatives, your representatives, with direction on what to do with your property. I would note that Mayor Richards had invited HPC here to attend and speak and provide input to council through the chairman, who was here and prepared to make a statement to explain some of the reasoning behind their suggestions and concerns. And with recognizing that the action of HPC was a recommendation of denial of the application for the changes to the building, this does require council approval for that. And I want to be careful that we recognize the separate hats that you wear, because you are going to consider that aspect of this project as a regulatory body, not as the owner of the property. Nonetheless, it is appropriate, I believe, for at the request of the mayor, for the chairman of the HPC to make some comments, if council wishes to hear them, recognizing that the resolution that they passed, which recommended denial and provided conditions in which they would recommend approval, and she could explain that and how they got to that, if that's desired of council to hear it. But at some point, you're going to have to take the recommendation of denial and go through a process where you consider these modifications to the building. I know you're providing direction as the owners at this point, and all of this has been as the owners of the building. But at some point, and it's not unusual for HPC to provide some direction to staff, to an applicant. And they have done that through their resolution. The mayor simply asked if they could speak through their chair to explain those further. Again, it's up to the council as to whether you wish to hear that.
I would welcome anybody from HPC to come and read a statement or speak to us tonight. I value their opinion highly, and I think we all do here at the table.
I would emphasize that the HPC should speak through its chairperson, and she is president. She is prepared to explain that position more thoroughly. I have to also recognize that if you ask your representatives to amend the application and send it back to HPC for further consideration of the compromise that you suggested, we need to keep HPC as an independent body. All she would be doing is discussing what their input was that led to the resolution and explaining that resolution. And I do believe that's appropriate.
Don't negotiate with her? Is that what
Pardon?
You're saying don't negotiate with her?
It is not a time to negotiate with HPC. I do believe that. You can direct your staff, as you have done, to consider changes to the application, but it is not a place to try to do that here at this table in this work session. But I do believe I know she's present, she's right there. And she does have something that she can say on behalf of the HPC.
Great. Let's come on up.
Acknowledge that they are. Yeah, I would note that there are other members of the HPC that are present, but if you wish to hear from them, that's up to you. The HPC would speak through its chairperson, who was present, and as Kara Thompson.
Thanks, Jim. It's odd sitting in this seat, but here I am. Thank you, guys. And I understand, and the board understands that this is a complicated process that factors in a lot of different aspects. And we are focused on the preservation of the historic structure. I'll get into a couple of the guidelines the applicant team brought up. But I think what's most important for us is that we remember that we are temporary users of a building that will outlive everybody at this table. And to preserve it is one thing, to create openings and remove features in it that we cannot get back is another. So all of our guidance was based on the fact that we want to see as much of that building remain when it comes to making very large window openings in a historic structure, when it comes to removing, and even there is a guideline bill, 10.1, regarding historic additions that are, it's preserve an older addition that has achieved historic significance in its own right, and we do enforce that on many projects, probably just none of yours, if it's never come up, but it is the guideline. We do think the applicant team has presented a very nice building. If it weren't historic, we'd be 100% on board. And I think that was the feeling across the board with all the members that are here today. I'm going to try and tamp my comments here. To address a couple of the guidelines that the applicant team brought up, we completely agreed wholeheartedly that there needs to be an ADA access to the structure. We did not believe that roof overhang needs to extend onto the Hopkins Ave street face. Those two, the Hopkins Ave street face is, we would consider a primary facade to the structure. It's a corner lot. There are two primary facades, and we'd limit any new architecture that occurs per our guidelines on those facades. So this, yes, that last rendering that Jen had up with the pulled back roof overhang was I think, an excellent response by the applicant team to the comments that we had made. Regarding the turf, and this was a discussion that we had at the board, there have been many properties in downtown Aspen that have requested to install turf. The Hotel Jerome, White House Tavern, we have denied all of those applications, so we just felt it would be a bit hypocritical of us to say, yes, go ahead with this, when we have rejected private property applications for the use of that material. And I think a lot of our comments were related to new openings in a historic structure. We understand new openings need to be created to make this space function. However, our guidelines say that they should be considered on rear or secondary walls, and new windows should be similar in scale to the historic openings on the building. The board did not believe that this design achieved that, and I'm happy to elaborate on any of that, but those were, I think, the key points that we discussed. And we appreciate that this is complicated.
Thanks for fleshing that out. Any questions for Kara?
No, I can attempt to give staff some direction and see if everyone concurs with it, if you want.
Yeah.
Can I make one more comment? As part of our resolution, one of the conditions we requested was that changes made following council approval would follow the typical review process. And Bill, I know you're familiar with that, but for any historic project, if you are going to encounter things during construction after you start to demo things that you did not anticipate. And typically those things come back to staff and a HPC monitor to review the appropriate path to take forward in terms of restoring or making a modification to the structure. We are asking that that path proceed as normal, as it would with any other project.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So John gave me his blessing to try to summarize what I heard at the table to give staff direction on. And thank you, Kara, for
Thank you very much.
explaining your position on everything. Again, as I said earlier, super appreciative of all the hard work and respectful of your opinions and your service on this board.
Thank you.
Thank you. What I think I heard, and this is all subject to sort of confirmation from my fellow council people, is we'd like you to work with HPC to find compromise on as much as possible. We respect their positions and think that their collaboration on this will result in ultimately the best project. I believe we had a majority position that it is okay to be contrary to them on the removal of the south-facing roof extension. I think we heard a majority position that synthetic turf is not desirable. So concurrence with HPC on that, in other words. So my recommendation would be sort of to go back to HPC, have interim conversations with Kara to the extent that that's allowed, or not, maybe not. But you do have a list of sort of their feedback. Respond to that feedback to the best of your ability. That doesn't mean you have to make 100% of those adjustments. But in your opinion, whatever we can do to still create a vibrant, successful project and building, we'd like you to do. Everyone concur with those statements? Feel free not to if I got something wrong.
Janice.
I just want to, we'll do whatever you want us to do, what council directs us to do. I do want you to think about timing. You know, it might be easier to work with staff to make sure we can just continue progressing and going to council next for the review, because that would be the next step. If you want us to go back, we can, but that will build delay into the timeline.
Well, I would say if the only thing we weren't going to do to accommodate HPC's comments was the roof extension, I'd be totally fine with that. So I sort of put that back on you guys as a team, saying, like, are you comfortable accepting every other of their feedback other than the roof extensions? If not, I'd like to give them an opportunity to sort of see things again.
I guess the question is, do you not want the window on the Connor Park facade of the building? Because that one was to go away. Sorry, I'm going through all these slides. Or do I need to go back further?
Towards the front of the presentation. Just to elaborate on what you're looking at here, so on the left is what was originally proposed in the land use application. Then after our first HPC hearing, we reduced the size of the window opening that's facing Connor Park. And in current direction, that window is that new opening is to be removed. And so,
Just the east facing.
That's our understanding of how that resolution is read.
Okay, listen, I'm one of five, but like for me, I don't think that determines the success or failure of the vibrancy of this building. And I want to respect all the great feedback of HPC. The one thing that I truly agree with you on is that removal of that roof overhang is meaningful to the success or the failure of this building, and so I am willing to compromise on that historic guideline there. The rest of the stuff I sort of don't want to be involved in the individual decisions on so much. So I'm happy to let HPC drive those decisions. That's my personal perspective.
I would agree with the east window doesn't bother me one way or the other. Obviously, I see it adds more light to the structure, but if that's a sticking point with HPC, I'm willing to let that go. As far as the vestibule, which we didn't talk about too much, I think it's really important that we have an excellent ADA accessible entranceway on the Connor Park side of the building, because that's where most of the activity is going to be. How we get there, I'm not sure. I really appreciate the work that was done to make it so that more brick was exposed and you could see through it. That seems to be the direction HPC wants us to go.
Just to clarify a couple things, I don't think either of these images represent a design that HPC is supportive of at this time due to the eave that extends out onto Hopkins. But taking a step back and responding, we certainly agree of the importance of the eave removal to making this a successful project, Bill. But would like to stress that really it's everything along Hopkins Avenue that we're agonizing over. And I imagine you can relate to this as a developer that, you try not to agonize as a developer over things you can't control. So in the private sector, for example, try not to agonize over where interest rates are going, but you do agonize over your site planning and the things you can control and the things you can absolutely do at this stage of the project to increase your likelihood of success and to make sure that your design is consistent and coherent with the use for the building. And really, this use is all about transparency and energy and vibrancy and a dynamic asset. So, we're agonizing over Hopkins Avenue and not just the eave, because we believe the way to call visual and inviting people's eye to see the building and to see the energy that will be coming out of the building, and thus hopefully inviting people in. And likewise, the transparency coming out to the Hopkins Avenue Parklet and Connor Park of being an environment that encourages people to walk out as well. It's really all of that, in trying to create this, it's about the connectivity between, the outdoor public use of the park through the parklet and connectivity, to the building on this side of it. And really, again, we're trying to create an environment that doesn't just connect the two uses. It's about creating connections for people within the community. So, I think it's important to think how the asset functions. Think about all the customers who show up. You might have somebody enter on the northwest side of the building at the visitor center who are just learning their way around Aspen, get pulled into the building on one side, have a chance to chat with a local, and then go out and enjoy their food and beverage out in Connor Park where they're chatting with more folks. And so it's really about facilitating connections between, local community, between visitors, and creating a center focal point. And that's why we're agonizing over this, I believe, at this time. And that's why it's not as simple as I think us just saying, hey, yes, we disagree on the eve and we can concede on these other items.
That's the private developer talking.
And to be clear, my point was, I wasn't saying that that's the only route you could or should go. My point was, if we didn't want to sort of go back to HPC, that's the only way I'd be comfortable. But if you want to make partial compromises or say that this is too important to compromise on, then I do think it should go back to HPC. That was my point. I understand the timing impact, and it sucks, but we have this board for a reason. So
I agree with that. Okay. Anything else we need to?
No, I do think you should recognize that your representatives can work with city staff, HPC staff, and can see how they can move that forward, whether it has to go back to HPC or simply can be worked with staff when it comes forward to you. That's where, ultimately it has to come back to you as part of this process to approve that. HPC's recommended denial, it's recommended approval based on all those conditions that ultimately comes back to you.
yeah, I would say irrespective of what HPC's ultimate recommendation is, if we're not going to accept all their recommendations with the one exception of the removal of the overhangs, then I would like to give them another opportunity to sort of see the final form as proposed and weigh in on it.
I would as well. I think it's important that HPC weighs in on it.
But you can make that I give the applicant and staff I would offer discretion on whether you choose to take path A or path B on that one.
How much does that potentially delay it?
I think it kind of depends on the significance of proposed changes. I will say to this point, I think both in terms of staff capacity and HPC's agenda. We've pushed some things around. We've done some special meetings. To get to this point has been a bit expedited to get through the Historic Preservation Commission's recommendation at this point. I bet we're looking into August in terms of the next available time for HPC to have space on their agenda based on other things that are there. So it would be a little bit for, I think, staff, the design team, applicant team to respond in any meaningful way, and then staff to have a chance to evaluate those changes, and then getting on HPC's agenda. So it would not be an insignificant commitment of time to that process.
We just all said yes to expediting this permit process, and now we're talking about delaying it several months, because that would not come back to council till fall, correct?
Yeah, I think at this point, where we are with HPC's recommendation, I think the intention is to get first reading in front of you in July, and then start, towards a public hearing and second reading, depending on, questions and comments and additional material that's necessary following first reading. So yeah, there would be a delay before that happened if you were wanting to get HPC feedback on specific proposed changes to the project prior to it coming back to you for resolution.
Why August, Ben? Before HPC can look
Just
at it?
because,
Is it them getting together? Or is
just because of, I will say, partially staff capacity and partially HPC agenda. I mean, to get to this point with our broad demands on staff services right now, particularly in the historic preservation realm, we're already sort of pushing thresholds of that right now with, I think, getting the project to this point. So we were certainly anticipating, being ready for resolution with City Council, but I think getting another turnaround with some likely design changes to evaluate, to present that appropriately to HPC, and getting, with other constraints on their agenda already scheduled. I think we're through the July meetings and probably into August.
I would say move forward, and not to disrespect HPC, but you can always email us the same comments, but we can look at it in July. And I say that because I don't think it will make a difference if we do it in July versus the fall, other than the process being slowed down. But I think the comments and the result will end up being the same, which is why I would say, please move forward, staff, with your best discretion. And I believe in this council to be able to make the necessary changes in July with even individual or as a group HPC member emails to us on these specific topics.
Well, we're happy to work with staff to try and take some of these issues off the table.
That would be nice.
Yeah, I don't know if HPC is in a position to make those kind of decisions, and the individual comments are not necessarily HPC comments. They either act as a board that is convened, or when you hear it as for your final determination through that process, may be able to, or individuals can make comments at that time.
Yeah.
But the email process is not necessarily an appropriate process.
Well, I'm just saying it's a public hearing, and the passion is there, and the impacts, at least for me, of individual members' comments will be great.
And as part of the public hearing process, that can happen, and individuals can speak on their own behalf.
Yeah.
I just want to be careful as to how you described it, is that
Fair.
they're not making a decision as an HPC through that process. Ben has a comment too.
And I would suggest, thinking about all the different moving pieces here, I think you've given clear direction to staff and their applicant team about your perspectives on some of these recommendations that HPC made. I think it's then up to the applicant team to decide how they're going to respond to that direction. We're going to see a resolution presented to you at first reading that's going to be reflective of the application status at that time, depending on any changes that might be made prior to that point. And I will also just say that I do think we do this on a lot of big projects. We weigh very heavily at what the conversation's like at the public hearing related to second reading. Council, that doesn't have to happen at a single meeting. That second reading public hearing, looking at different design iterations and that kind of thing can spread out over, a few meetings with city council to land on something that there's consensus with council. So I do think that they're inherent with the ordinance process with city council, with the direction, that I've heard tonight. I think the applicant team can decide how to respond to that. The application that you see at first reading will reflect the current status of that application. And then you folks will have an opportunity to weigh all of these things during the public hearing.
Is it possible to do HPC review and first reading of council somewhat concurrent?
I'd have to take a closer look at how we kind of had scoped out council timing with HPC's agenda. I haven't done that comparison, but if there's a very strong desire to get it in front of HPC, again with some design iterations that might be changing, we can certainly facilitate that. I can't guarantee timing of that at this moment.
Theoretically, though, it would be possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not inconsistent with the process that we've done.
There's not a preclusion to it, but it's just about whether or not we can be efficient with our timing.
Mr. Kennedy?
One question I've got, and this may be unconventional and maybe the land use code does not allow for it, but the condition that asks for the normal process moving forward, working with HP staff and monitor, is there a possibility that we begin that monitor relationship now, working with HP staff? Like all of you, we value what HPC has to say, and again, are just working to strike the balance. And so if there's a way that we could work with a monitor and HP staff collectively so that HPC's voice was represented, is that something the land use code allows for?
It's atypical. I mean, the staff and monitor response typically happens during building permit. I think ultimately what I hear from council is a desire to take seriously the comments and concerns that HPC had with some of the elements of the design, to be responsive to that, and also to sort of get a project out that's going to work for the community. I certainly understand that dynamic. It seems to me that there's been some very specific comments made this evening. And to be square, I'm being a little careful with the way that I'm talking about it because we still got a quasi-judicial review that we're going to be considering, here in a few weeks. And so I'm trying not to color that too much. But, I do think that the application could come forward with some proposed changes based on the comments that were heard this evening. And I think then it would be up to City Council and your deliberation as to whether or not those potential changes were being reflective or responsive to some of the comments and questions that HPC had in their recommendation. So I think there's a variety of ways that happen. I think certainly, I don't think there's any preclusion from that discussion happening sort of ahead of that time, but I really do think absent like another full hearing with HPC, where you have a unified voice from HPC giving another sort of amended recommendation, I really do think that the ordinance process probably gives council and importantly the community to evaluate the application, the design at the time that public hearing is happening, and everybody can decide what's appropriate at that time. I'm couching my words a little bit because I do think that there's a fairly important review that you folks have, and a very different role that you have this evening as your owners, that you're going to be looking at this application through.
So in summary, you're saying you feel confident that we could go forward with this process without involving HPC right off the bat?
I think HPC gave a specific set of recommendations back to you. I think you've responded to that set of comments this evening. It seems like there's some consensus, or at least majority, around some of those topics. I think from my perspective, the applicant team has heard those comments. I think they have decisions to make about what that response to your comments this evening are. And then there's going to be an application in front of you in a few weeks, likely. And so I do think that there's the ability within that ordinance process to evaluate the design as it kind of its kind of most recent iteration, depending on, what proposed changes might come out of that. And then you folks have, review criteria and everything else on the historic preservation topic and a whole bunch of other topics that really haven't been addressed this evening to evaluate this program through, or this project through. So from my perspective, there was a good dialogue this evening. I heard specific comments, and I think depending on the degree of any amendments that might be made to the application between now and when we're in front of you with first reading, I feel like the ordinance process gives additional time for you to evaluate where the project is based on the comments that HPC has already provided to you. But if you desire for it to go back to HPC, I think that we would want to have a kind of a new resolution of recommendation. And it's very possible. We can certainly pull it off. We can do it. We can schedule it. I will say that it'll add some time to the overall process.
Kara, please.
Ben, you might be the person to answer this, but it's my understanding that staff could bring in chair and vice chair to a discussion instead of beginning the monitoring committee, as the applicant suggested, that staff could coordinate with chair and vice chair to provide feedback.
It's not a process that I'm familiar with, but if you say so.
I don't know. I know that it's a different process for the affordable housing projects, and that's the path that we've taken to provide expedited feedback. I asked if staff could coordinate with chair and vice chair to get feedback. I'm just curious if that's a process that
I think per Todd's suggestion, I think that can happen informally. I don't know that there's a formal process for it, but I think certainly we're okay with it happening informally. If that would make you folks feel better, if those conversations happened. I don't think it's a formal process in the land use code, but if those conversations are desired, we can certainly facilitate those.
I do want to be careful about what you've described as what the quasi-judicial process that is going to go forward here.
That's fundamentally my concern right now, is to maintain the integrity of that.
Yeah.
And so I think those discussions could happen informally. I don't think there's any kind of formal process that describes that.
Yeah, I agree.
I think my preference would be to try to do these two things concurrently and keep HPC involved as much as possible, unless you're taking that alternate path that I described, which is incorporate everything they said except the roof overhangs.
Okay. If it was just one thing that we were discussing, like if it was just the eave or just the overhangs, that would be one thing, but we're talking about 4 or 5 different things here, so I think it's important to keep a close eye on this and try to get as much concurrence on this as we can. So with that said, is there the ability, I'm sure there is actually, to, if we get to a point where we want HPC to weigh in on, we can schedule that?
It would be something that I think both for the applicant team and staff, we need that now because of other agenda, sort of both for you folks and your agenda and making sure we've got time on your agenda as these conversations happen, but also with the Historic Preservation Commission and also staff resources to sort of just build that into kind of our work plan over the next month or 6 weeks.
Well, I'm wondering if I should do a straw poll to see how the rest of the council feels. Should we schedule that HPC meeting, or should we go forward with just staff, HPC staff?
I think what Ben has described is a compromise to me in working with HPC and allowing the public to weigh in the next iteration of this project and does not delay the project. I'm not in favor of sending this all the way back to HPC later in the summer and delaying this several months.
Same.
I just voiced my opinion.
You did.
I'm happy to reiterate if you want me to.
No, I think we're good.
Yeah.
I think we've made it pretty clear to the applicant the changes that we'd like to see. And I trust Ben implicitly with his guidance. I think if he says this is a way that he feels it would work, that works for me. And especially with the support of Christine and Sam, I think we will go forward with this internally and not schedule an extra HPC meeting at this point. But I would like the chair and the vice chair to have the opportunity to address this if we can figure out how to make that happen. Okay.
Good.
Thank you for yours.
Appreciate everyone's hard work.
And thanks for coming, Kara. Your comment about us being temporary stewards means a lot to me. All right, I think that wraps up our work session for the evening. Thanks.